She was just 8 years old, too young to walk to school alone, too small to control 2 full-grown German shepherds. Yet every morning, Allie Thompson did exactly that, disappearing into the woods behind her family's farmhouse like she was answering some silent call. Her mother thought it was innocent. The neighbors thought it was strange. But no one suspected the truth. Not until the dogs came home without her. Not until police followed their tracks and discovered what had been hiding beneath Meadowfield all along. The mist hadn't lifted yet over Meadowfield when the sun began painting the cornfields in shades of amber and gold. It was the kind of morning that made people pull their blankets tighter, the kind where the world felt slow and safe. Coffee brewed in quiet kitchens. Porch lights blinked off one by one. And somewhere near the edge of town, where the Thompson farmhouse sat bordered by thick pine woods, an 8-year-old girl with wild blonde curls was already awake. Allie Thompson had been up before dawn, like always. She stood at the back door in her favorite purple jacket, the one with the torn pocket her mother kept meaning to sew. At her feet sat Shadow and Milo, 2 German shepherds whose eyes tracked her every movement with the kind of loyalty that made strangers uneasy. They weren't just pets. They were her protectors, her companions, her whole world. "You ready, boys?" Allie whispered, her breath fogging in the cool air. Shadow's ears perked. Milo's tail gave a single, measured wag. She didn't wait for permission. She never did. With a gentle tug on their leashes, Allie pushed open the door and stepped into the morning fog, her small frame swallowed almost immediately by the gray curtain of mist. Behind her, the farmhouse door swung shut with a soft click. Inside, her mother, Janelle Thompson, poured her second cup of coffee and glanced at the clock. 6:47 a.m. Right on schedule. She'd grown used to Allie's early morning ritual. The girl loved those woods, loved the freedom of running wild with her dogs before school started. Janelle had walked the same trails as a child. She knew every tree, every creek bend, every hidden hollow. It was safe. Familiar. Or so she thought. By 8 o'clock, Janelle had set the table. Scrambled eggs, toast with butter, a glass of orange juice. Allie's breakfast sat waiting, steam still rising from the plate. But the chair remained empty. By 9, Janelle stepped onto the back porch, scanning the tree line. No movement. No sound except the distant caw of crows circling overhead. "Allie," she called, her voice swallowed by the vastness of the forest. Nothing. By 10:30, her hands were shaking as she dialed 911. And by 11 o'clock, when the first patrol car pulled up the gravel driveway, Janelle's worst fear materialized in the form of 2 mud-covered German shepherds limping out of the woods, their leashes dragging behind them, their collars torn and bloodied. But Allie was nowhere to be seen. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button for more. Also, share your thoughts and let me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow's story is going to be just as epic, so don't miss out. Now, let's continue. Sheriff Raymond Cole stepped out of his cruiser, a tall white man in his mid-40s with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much for a small town like Meadowfield. He'd been sheriff for 12 years, and in all that time, he'd never had to deal with a missing child. Traffic accidents, petty theft, the occasional domestic dispute, sure. But this was different. Janelle rushed toward him, her dark skin pale with panic, tears streaking her cheeks. "She's gone. My baby's gone. The dogs came back without her. Something's wrong. Something's." "Ma'am," Raymond said gently, raising a hand to calm her. "We're going to find her. I promise you that. But I need you to tell me everything. When did you last see her?" "This morning. Around 6:45. She always takes the dogs into the woods. Always. She's done it 100 times. But she's never been gone this long." Raymond glanced at the 2 dogs panting heavily near the porch steps. Shadow's paw was bleeding. Milo's fur was matted with something dark, mud or worse. Their eyes were wild, frantic, like they'd seen something they couldn't explain. "Deputy Harris," Raymond called over his shoulder. A younger officer jogged up, notebook in hand. "Get animal control to check those dogs. And radio the K9 unit. We're going into those woods." Within the hour, Search teams assembled at the edge of the forest. Volunteers from town, deputies with flashlights, and 2 tracking dogs trained to follow scent trails. The air buzzed with tension. People whispered. Parents held their children closer. Everyone knew Allie Thompson. Sweet kid. Quiet. The kind who smiled at strangers and helped carry groceries for the elderly. If something happened to her. Raymond led the search himself, following the path Janelle said Allie always took. The trail was narrow, winding through dense underbrush and towering pines. Broken branches marked where someone or something had moved through recently. The dogs, Shadow and Milo, refused to leave Janelle's side now, but their eyes kept darting back toward the woods, ears flat against their heads. 20 minutes in, one of the canine handlers stopped abruptly. "Sheriff, over here." Raymond pushed through the brush and froze. There, snagged on a low-hanging branch, was a piece of torn fabric. Purple. The same color as Allie's jacket. His stomach tightened. "Keep moving," he ordered, his voice steady despite the dread creeping up his spine. "She's out here somewhere." The team pressed deeper into the woods, the trail growing fainter, the trees closing in tighter. The sun, now high overhead, barely penetrated the canopy. Shadows stretched long and strange. The air felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Then, from somewhere far ahead, a sound pierced the silence. A child's voice. Faint. Desperate. "Help!" Every officer froze. "Allie!" Raymond shouted, breaking into a run. But as quickly as the voice came, it vanished. Swallowed by the forest like it had never existed at all. Raymond stopped in a small clearing, chest heaving, eyes scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the wind whispering through the branches. And somewhere deep beneath his feet, something old and forgotten began to wake. The search team spread out across the clearing, flashlights cutting through the shadows like desperate fingers reaching for answers. Raymond's radio crackled with static as deputies called in from different positions, each report the same. No sign of the girl. No tracks. Nothing. "Sheriff," Deputy Harris said, breathing hard as he jogged up. "We've covered a half-mile radius. There's no trace of her past this point. It's like she just vanished." Raymond clenched his jaw, staring into the dense wall of trees ahead. The voice they'd heard, that desperate cry for help, it had come from somewhere close. He was certain of it. But now, standing in the eerie stillness of the forest, doubt crept in. Had they imagined it? Was the wind playing tricks? "We keep looking," Raymond said firmly. "I'm not leaving these woods without her." Back at the edge of the tree line, Janelle stood trembling, arms wrapped tight around herself. Shadow and Milo paced restlessly at her feet, whining low in their throats. They kept looking back toward the forest, muscles tense, ears pricked forward like they were listening to something no human could hear. "Easy, boys," Janelle whispered, her voice breaking. "Please. Where is she? Where's Allie?" Shadow suddenly pulled away from her, the leash slipping through her fingers. Before she could react, Milo bolted after him. Both dogs tore back into the woods, their powerful bodies crashing through the underbrush with single-minded determination. "Shadow! Milo!" Janelle screamed, stumbling after them. Raymond's radio crackled. "Sheriff!" The dogs just ran back into the forest. Mother's following. "You need to get back here." "Damn it," Raymond muttered, already moving. "All units, converge on my position. Follow those dogs." By the time Raymond caught up, Shadow and Milo had stopped beneath an enormous oak tree, its gnarled roots spreading across the forest floor like ancient fingers. The dogs weren't just standing there. They were digging. Frantically. Desperately. Their paws tore at the earth, dirt flying behind them as they worked with an intensity that made the hair on Raymond's neck stand up. "What are they doing?" Harris asked, shining his flashlight on the scene. "I don't know," Raymond said slowly, moving closer. "But they're not confused. They're looking for something." Janelle dropped to her knees beside them, tears streaming down her face. "Find her, boys. Please. Find my baby." Shadow's claws hit something solid with a metallic scrape. Everyone froze. Raymond stepped forward, kneeling beside the hole the dogs had dug. He brushed away loose soil with his hand and felt the cold, unmistakable surface of metal. His heart began to pound. "Get me a shovel," he ordered. "Now." 2 deputies rushed back to the vehicles while Raymond and Harris used their hands to clear more dirt. Within minutes, they'd uncovered a rusted metal surface about 4 feet across, partially buried beneath decades of soil and roots. It was a door. An old trapdoor with a circular handle worn smooth by time and weather. "Jesus," Harris breathed. "What the hell is this doing out here?" Raymond didn't answer. He gripped the handle and pulled. The door didn't budge. He tried again, this time putting his full weight into it. With a groan of protesting metal, the trapdoor shifted, then suddenly gave way, swinging open with a screech that sent birds scattering from the trees above. A rush of cold air blasted up from the opening, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of chemicals, stale and bitter, mixed with something else. Decay. Old machinery. Abandonment. Shadow and Milo barked furiously at the opening, their bodies rigid, hackles raised. Raymond aimed his flashlight down into the darkness. A narrow metal ladder descended into blackness, disappearing beyond the reach of his beam. The walls were concrete, smooth and industrial, nothing natural about them. "This is a structure," Raymond said quietly, his mind racing. "An underground structure. Out here in the middle of nowhere. Should we call for backup?" Harris asked, his voice uneasy. Raymond looked at Janelle, saw the raw desperation in her eyes, and made his decision. "Radio it in. But we're going down. That little girl could be down there." He swung his legs over the edge and placed his boot on the first rung of the ladder. The metal was ice-cold even through his shoe. Shadow barked sharply as if warning him, but Raymond ignored it. He descended slowly, his flashlight held between his teeth, each rung creaking under his weight. The ladder went down 15 feet before his boots hit solid ground. The air down here was different. Colder. Heavier. Like the earth itself was pressing in from all sides. Raymond pulled his flashlight from his mouth and swept the beam across his surroundings. He was standing in a narrow corridor carved from concrete. Old fluorescent light fixtures hung dark and broken from the ceiling. Cables snaked along the walls. And on either side of the hallway were rooms, small chambers with reinforced doors, some hanging open, others sealed shut. "Sheriff." Harris called from above. "What do you see?" Raymond's voice came out hoarse. "You need to get down here. Now." One by one, the deputies descended. Harris. 2 others. Their flashlights created a patchwork of light in the oppressive darkness. Shadow and Milo came last, sliding down in a controlled fall, landing beside Raymond and immediately pressing forward down the corridor, noses to the ground. The walls were covered in grime and mold, but as Raymond moved deeper, his light caught something carved into the concrete. Letters. Words. He stopped and aimed his beam directly at the wall. "Project Alpha, 1978. What is this place?" A young rookie officer whispered, his voice barely audible. Raymond didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was reeling, trying to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just some abandoned shelter or storage bunker. This was a facility. A hidden, underground facility that had been sitting beneath Metafield for decades, and no one knew it existed. They moved forward, their boots echoing in the silence. Broken monitors lined the walls. Old lab equipment lay scattered across metal tables, covered in dust. Shattered glass crunched beneath their feet. Papers, yellowed and brittle, were strewn across the floor. Raymond picked one up carefully. The words were faded, but he could make out fragments. Subject behavioral modification. Test results inconclusive. Recommend immediate termination of. The paper crumbled in his hands. Shadow and Milo surged ahead, barking sharply. Raymond followed them around a corner and stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the beam of his flashlight, pressed into the dusty floor of the corridor, was a single small footprint. Fresh. Muddy. The size of a child's shoe. Raymond's blood turned to ice. "She's down here," he said, his voice tight. Allie's down here somewhere. The dogs pulled harder, leading them deeper into the darkness. And from somewhere far ahead, echoing through the abandoned corridors, came a sound that made every officer reach for their weapon. The faint, mechanical hum of something powering on. The mechanical hum grew louder as Raymond and his team moved deeper into the corridor, their flashlights creating wild shadows on the concrete walls. Shadow and Milo stayed close now, their earlier frenzy replaced by a cautious, predatory focus. Whatever they sensed down here, it had them on edge. "Sheriff," Harris said, his voice tight. "That sound. Something's running down here." "I know," Raymond replied, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Stay sharp." They rounded another corner and found themselves in what appeared to be a central hub. Multiple corridors branched off in different directions, each disappearing into darkness. In the center of the room sat a large metal desk, its surface covered in dust and scattered papers. Behind it, a wall of filing cabinets, most with drawers hanging open, their contents spilled across the floor. Raymond swept his light across the space and his breath caught. On one wall, a massive corkboard still hung intact, covered in photographs, documents, and what looked like research notes. Much of it had deteriorated with time, but enough remained to paint a disturbing picture. "Get forensics down here," Raymond ordered into his radio. "And I need Detective Morrison. Tell her to bring her team. This is now a crime scene." Within the hour, the underground facility was flooded with activity. Portable lights were set up, casting harsh white illumination across spaces that hadn't seen light in decades. Crime scene techs in white suits moved methodically through the corridors, photographing, cataloging, collecting evidence. A generator hummed above ground, feeding power down through hastily strung cables. Detective Cassandra Morrison arrived with her team, a sharp-eyed black woman in her late 30s who'd transferred to Meadowfield from Atlanta 2 years ago looking for a quieter life. That quiet life had just ended. She stood in the central hub, slowly turning in a circle, taking it all in. "What in God's name is this place?" "We don't know yet," Raymond said. "But it's been here a long time. And someone's been using it recently." One of the forensic techs approached, holding a stack of documents in gloved hands. "Sheriff, detective, you need to see these." They gathered around as the tech carefully laid out the papers on the metal desk. The documents were old, the letterhead bearing the seal of a private research corporation that Raymond didn't recognize. But the words were clear enough, even if their meaning was horrifying. Project Alpha. Memory imprint testing and genetic behavior studies. Phase 3. Juvenile subject analysis. Classification. Classified, Level 5. Morrison's jaw tightened as she read. Memory imprint testing? Genetic behavior studies? They were experimenting on children. "It looks that way," the tech said quietly. "And there's more. We found evidence of recent activity. Fresh water bottles. Modern flashlight batteries. Someone's been down here within the last few weeks." Raymond felt sick. "Keep processing. I want every document photographed and analyzed. Every room searched." He moved away from the desk, following the sound of Shadow and Milo's soft whining. The dogs had wandered into one of the side corridors, their attention fixed on something on the wall. As Raymond approached, his flashlight beam caught it. A child's drawing, faded but still visible, taped to the concrete wall at child height. The drawing showed 2 large dogs and a small girl with blonde hair, all 3 smiling, standing beneath a bright yellow sun. In the corner, written in crayon in a child's careful handwriting, were 2 letters. A.T. Raymond's hand trembled as he reached for his radio. "Morrison, you need to see this." The detective appeared moments later, taking one look at the drawing before pulling out her phone and snapping several photos. A.T. Allie Thompson. "She's been down here before," Raymond said, his voice hollow. "Somehow that little girl found this place. Or someone brought her here," Morrison countered, her expression grim. Shadow suddenly barked, sharp and urgent. Both dogs were now focused on a sealed metal door at the end of the corridor, scratching at its base, their nails scraping against steel. The door was different from the others, reinforced, with a heavy lock mechanism that looked newer than the rest of the facility. We need to get that door open, Raymond said. It took 2 officers with a pry bar and a sledgehammer 15 minutes to break through the lock. When the door finally swung open with a groan of protesting metal, the smell that wafted out made everyone step back. Not decay. Something chemical. Preservative. Morrison aimed her flashlight into the room beyond and froze. The walls were covered with Polaroid photographs. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Each one showing a different child. Different ages, different faces, but all with the same haunting expression, posed against the same blank white wall. Each photograph had a date written beneath it in neat black marker. Raymond stepped inside slowly, his light moving from photo to photo. The dates went back years. Some to the 1970s, others to the 80s and 90s. Children who would be adults now if they'd survived, if they'd ever been found. But it was Morrison who found the photograph that made the world stop. Raymond, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned. She was holding a Polaroid in her gloved hand, her face pale. He crossed to her and looked down at the image. A young girl with wild blonde curls and bright eyes, wearing a purple jacket, standing against that same white wall. The date beneath the photo was written in fresh ink. 2 days ago. The girl in the photograph was Allie Thompson. Raymond's mind reeled. 2 days ago. While everyone in Meadowfield thought Allie was just taking her morning walks, someone had brought her here, photographed her, and added her to this grotesque collection. Imagine being the officer who discovers that photograph. A child you've been searching for, whose mother is waiting above ground praying for her safe return, staring back at you from a wall of missing children in an underground laboratory that shouldn't exist. What goes through your mind in that moment? Is it fear that you're already too late? Rage at whoever did this? Or hope, desperate hope, that if the photo was taken 2 days ago, maybe she's still alive somewhere in these corridors? What would you feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Morrison's hand shook as she carefully placed the photo into an evidence bag. We need to find her. Now. Shadow and Milo had moved to the far corner of the room, sniffing at the base of the wall. Raymond followed them, his light sweeping across the photographs. As he moved closer, one of the Polaroids came loose from its tack and fluttered to the ground. Raymond bent to pick it up and froze. Behind where the photograph had been, taped directly to the concrete wall, was a hand-drawn map of the forest above. The detail was incredible, showing trails, landmarks, and the location of the farmhouse. But what made Raymond's blood run cold were the marks scattered across the map. Red X's. At least a dozen of them, spread throughout the woods in a pattern that suggested careful planning. And circled in thick red marker, pulsing with intent, was one location in particular. The clearing where they'd found Allie's torn jacket. Detective, Raymond said quietly. We're not dealing with a random disappearance. Morrison moved beside him, staring at the map. What are we dealing with? Raymond's voice was grim. A hunting ground. The forest above ground had transformed into a full-scale operation. State police arrived with additional K-9 units. FBI agents were en route from the regional office. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing the chaos below. But Raymond wasn't waiting for federal jurisdiction to take over his case. He stood in the clearing with Morrison and a team of 6 officers, the hand-drawn map spread across the hood of his cruiser. Each red X had been marked with GPS coordinates. They were going to check every single one. We split into 3 teams, Raymond said, his finger tracing the map. Harris, you take the eastern marks. Morrison, you've got the southern perimeter. I'll take the northern section with Jenkins and Rodriguez. What are we looking for? Jenkins asked, a young officer barely 2 years out of the academy. Anything, Morrison answered before Raymond could. Disturbed earth. Old structures. Signs of recent activity. Whoever made this map had a purpose. We need to figure out what it was. Shadow and Milo remained with Raymond's team. The dogs had earned their place in this investigation. They'd found the bunker. They'd found the photograph. If anyone was going to find Allie, it would be them. The first 2 X marks revealed nothing. Just forest. trees and underbrush that showed no signs of disturbance. But the third location, deep in the northern woods where the pine trees grew so thick that sunlight barely penetrated, was different. Shadow stopped abruptly, his body going rigid. Milo circled back, whining softly. "What is it, boy?" Raymond asked, scanning the area. Then he saw it. Almost invisible beneath a curtain of ivy and wild undergrowth, a structure. Not a bunker this time. A cabin. Old, weathered, its wood darkened by decades of moisture and neglect. But unlike the underground facility, this place showed clear signs of recent habitation. Smoke drifted from a crooked chimney. A path had been worn through the ivy to the front door. Raymond drew his weapon, signaling for Jenkins and Rodriguez to flank the entrance. His heart hammered in his chest as he approached, boots crunching on dead leaves. "Sheriff's Department," he called out. "Anyone inside, make yourself known." Silence. Raymond tried again, louder. "This is Sheriff Cole. We're coming in." He tested the door handle. Unlocked. It swung open with a soft creak, revealing a dim interior lit only by the dying embers of a fire in a stone hearth. The smell hit him immediately. Not decay. Something worse. Antiseptic. Chemicals. The same bitter scent from the underground facility. In a wooden chair by the fire sat an elderly man, his frame so thin and frail he looked like he might crumble into dust. He wore tattered clothes that might have once been a suit. His white hair hung in wispy strands around a face carved by time and something else. Guilt, perhaps. Or madness. "Sir," Raymond said carefully, weapons still raised. "I need you to identify yourself." The old man didn't look up. He just stared into the dying fire, his lips moving in a whisper Raymond couldn't quite hear. Rodriguez moved past Raymond, sweeping his flashlight across the cabin's interior. Shelves lined one wall, filled with old journals and file boxes. A metal table in the corner held laboratory equipment, beakers and tubes that looked wildly out of place in a forest cabin. And on another table, stacks of photographs. More Polaroids. "Sheriff," Rodriguez said quietly, "you need to see this." But Raymond was focused on the man in the chair. He holstered his weapon and approached slowly, kneeling to bring himself to eye level. "Sir, I need you to look at me." The old man's head turned, and Raymond found himself staring into eyes that were clouded with cataracts but still sharp with intelligence. And something else. Recognition. "The woods remember everything," the old man whispered, his voice like dried leaves scraping against stone. "Even the ones we tried to forget." Raymond's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" The man's trembling hand reached for something on his chest. An ID badge, yellowed and cracked, hanging from a frayed lanyard. Raymond leaned closer, reading the faded text. "Dr. Leonard Rains, Project Alpha, Lead Research Scientist Clearance Level 5. "Jesus," Raymond breathed. "You're one of them. You worked at that facility." Dr. Rains' laugh was bitter, broken. "Worked? Yes. That's one word for it." His eyes drifted back to the fire. "We thought we were doing important work. Advancing science. Understanding the human mind." He paused, his hands shaking violently. "We were wrong." "Where is she?" Raymond demanded, grabbing the old man's shoulder. "Where is Allie Thompson?" "Allie," Dr. Rains repeated as if tasting the name. Such a pretty name. They all had pretty names. Morrison's voice crackled over Raymond's radio. "Sheriff, we've got something at the southern location. You need to get here." But Raymond couldn't leave. Not yet. He grabbed the old man's face, forcing him to make eye contact. "An 8-year-old girl is missing. She was photographed in that bunker 2 days ago. If you know where she is, you need to tell me now." Dr. Rain's eyes filled with tears that spilled down his weathered cheeks. "I tried to stop it. After they shut us down. After the others left. I tried to bury it all. But it wouldn't stay buried." His voice dropped to a whisper. "The work continued. Not by me. By someone else. Someone who believed." "Who?" Raymond demanded. Who continued the work? Before Dr. Raines could answer, Jenkins called out from across the cabin. "Sheriff, look at this." On the table beside the old man's chair, partially hidden beneath a stained blanket, was a small purple hair ribbon. The kind a little girl might wear. Raymond picked it up with trembling hands, recognizing it immediately from the photographs Janelle had shown him. It was Allie's. Shadow, who had been standing near the doorway, suddenly moved forward. His body went low, a growl building in his throat. The fur along his spine stood on end as he approached Dr. Raines, lips pulling back to reveal teeth. The old man looked down at the dog, and for the first time, something like emotion crossed his face. Not fear. Something stranger. Almost like satisfaction. "The dogs always knew," he said softly. "We couldn't fool them. No matter how much we tried." "What are you talking about?" Raymond demanded. Dr. Raines' gaze shifted back to Raymond, and a faint smile ghosted across his lips. It was the smile of a man holding a secret he'd carried for far too long. A secret that had eaten him alive from the inside. "She found her way back, didn't she?" The words hung in the air like a curse. Shadow lunged, and Raymond barely pulled him back in time. The dog was frantic now, barking and snarling, trying to get at the old man. Milo joined in, both dogs creating such chaos that Rodriguez had to help Raymond pull them outside. When they returned moments later, Dr. Raines hadn't moved. He just sat there, staring into the dying fire, that same faint smile on his face. "Book him," Raymond ordered. "Obstruction, possible kidnapping, and anything else we can make stick. And someone get me everything in this cabin. Every journal, every file, every photograph. I want to know what the hell Project Alpha was really about." As officers moved in to arrest Dr. Raines, the old man spoke one more time, his voice barely audible. "You're looking in the wrong place, Sheriff. You won't find her in the woods." Raymond turned. "Then where?" Dr. Raines' smile widened, revealing yellowed teeth. "She's exactly where she was always meant to be. Where they all end up. In the place between memory and forgetting." His eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward in the chair, unconscious. The paramedics loaded Dr. Raines onto a stretcher, his frail body barely making an impression under the straps. He remained unconscious, his vital signs weak but stable. Raymond watched as they carried him out of the cabin, relief and frustration warring inside him. The old man had answers, but whether he'd live long enough to give them was another question entirely. "Sheriff," Rodriguez called from the back of the cabin. "There's a basement entrance here." Raymond crossed the room to where Rodriguez stood beside a rotting bookshelf. Behind it, partially concealed by decades of grime and neglect, was a trapdoor set into the floor. Unlike the rusted bunker entrance in the woods, this one had been used recently. The hinges were oiled. Fresh scratches marked the wood where it had been pried open. "Get that shelf moved," Raymond ordered. It took 3 officers to shift the heavy furniture. When they finally pulled the trapdoor open, a ladder descended into darkness. The smell that rose from below was overwhelming. Chemicals, preservatives, and something organic that made Raymond's stomach turn. Morrison appeared in the doorway, her face flushed from running through the woods. "What did we find?" "Basement," Raymond said, already starting down the ladder. "And I've got a feeling it's going to be worse than the bunker." He was right. The basement was larger than the cabin above, extending back into the earth like a root system. Portable lights were brought down, illuminating a space that looked like a combination of archive and laboratory. Metal shelves lined the walls, packed with file boxes, journals, and sealed crates marked with biohazard symbols. In the center of the room sat a work table covered in documents, as if someone had been reviewing them recently. "Start cataloging everything," Morrison ordered her team. "I want photos of every document, every label. Chain of custody on all physical evidence." Raymond moved to the work table, his flashlight beam sweeping across the scattered papers. They were research notes, dense with scientific terminology he barely understood. But certain phrases jumped out at him, each one more disturbing than the last. Genetic acceleration protocols. Behavioral imprinting through neural pathways. Canine DNA integration studies. Subject survival instinct enhancement. They were experimenting with DNA, Raymond said quietly, his hands trembling as he held one of the documents, trying to combine human and animal traits. Morrison joined him, her expression growing darker as she read over his shoulder. These are children's files. They were experimenting on children. A forensic tech approached carrying a sealed crate he'd pulled from one of the shelves. Detective Sheriff, you need to see this. He set the crate on the table and carefully pried it open. Inside, packed in foam and labeled with meticulous care, were dozens of vials containing preserved biological samples. Blood, tissue, each one marked with a subject number and date. But it was the documents inside that made Raymond's world tilt. Medical records. Detailed files on each subject who'd been part of Project Alpha. Names, ages, physical descriptions, and most disturbing of all, notes on how each child's genetics had been altered. How their behavior had changed. How many had survived the process? Not many. Morrison worked through the files methodically, her face a professional mask even as Raymond could see the fury building behind her eyes. Then she stopped, her hand freezing on one particular folder. Raymond, she said, her voice strange. You need to look at this. The file was thicker than the others, marked with a red tab that indicated special status. The label on the front read, Subject A13, Thompson, L. Raymond's heart stopped. Thompson. Morrison opened the file carefully. Inside was a photograph of a young man, maybe mid-20s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. The photo was clipped to a personnel form from Project Alpha, dated 1995. Leonard Thompson, Research Assistant. Clearance Level 3. Assignment. Behavioral Imprinting Studies. Allie's father, Raymond breathed. He worked here. He was part of this. Morrison turned the pages, her expression growing more troubled with each one. Not just worked here. According to this, he was one of the test subjects. They used him in their own experiments. The documents told a story that made Raymond sick. Leonard Thompson had started as a research assistant, young and eager to contribute to what he'd been told was groundbreaking psychological research. But Project Alpha wasn't what it claimed to be. When Leonard discovered the true nature of the experiments, the genetic manipulation, the children being used as test subjects, he tried to expose it. That's when he became a subject himself. The notes were clinical, detached, describing Leonard's transformation with the same cold precision used on the children. DNA samples taken. Behavioral modifications attempted. Neural pathways altered to enhance survival instincts using canine genetic markers. They turned him into an experiment, Morrison said, her voice tight with rage. When he tried to blow the whistle, they made him part of the project. Raymond flipped through more pages, his hands shaking. The last entries were dated 8 years ago, right around the time Janelle said Leonard had disappeared. Subject A, 13 showing signs of psychological instability. Recommending immediate containment and memory suppression protocols. Subject A, 13 escaped facility during transport. Full manhunt initiated. Subject A, 13 remains at large. Project Alpha shutdown imminent due to security breach. All evidence to be destroyed. The final page was a single typed line. Subject A13. Status erased. He didn't just disappear, Raymond said, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. They erased him. Destroyed all records of his existence. Made it look like he'd just walked away. Morrison was already on her phone, calling in to the forensic lab. I need an immediate DNA comparison. Cross-reference the samples from Subject A13 with Allie Thompson's medical records. I need results yesterday. While they waited, Raymond and Morrison continued through the files. They found blueprints of the underground facility, showing sections that their teams hadn't discovered yet. Maps of the forest with more locations marked. And most disturbing, a journal that appeared to belong to Dr. Raines himself. The entries were rambling, written over decades, chronicling his growing guilt and madness. He wrote about the children they'd experimented on. The ones who'd died. The ones who'd survived but were forever changed. And he wrote about Leonard Thompson, the young assistant who'd reminded him of his own son. I tried to help him, one entry read. I tried to undo what we'd done. But the modifications were permanent. His DNA had been altered at a fundamental level. He wasn't fully human anymore. And he wasn't fully canine. He was something in between. Something that couldn't exist in either world. Raymond's phone buzzed. The forensic lab. Sheriff Cole, he answered. Sheriff, this is Dr. Patricia Hayes at the State Forensics Lab. I have your DNA comparison results. Go ahead. There was a pause. Sheriff, I've run these tests 3 times. The results are unusual. The sample from subject A13 and Allie Thompson's DNA share significant markers, consistent with a parent-child relationship. But there's something else. What? Both samples show genetic anomalies I've never seen before. Non-human DNA sequences integrated into their genetic code. It's impossible, but it's there. Canine markers woven into their human DNA. Raymond's blood ran cold. What does that mean? It means, Dr. Hayes said slowly, that whatever was done to subject A13, those genetic changes were passed on to his daughter. Allie Thompson isn't just Leonard Thompson's child. She's carrying the results of Project Alpha's experiments in every cell of her body. Morrison had been listening on speaker. She looked at Raymond, her face pale. The experiments never ended. No, Raymond said grimly. They just went into the next generation. Morrison picked up Dr. Rain's journal, flipping to the most recent entries. Her eyes widened as she read. Raymond, listen to this. It's dated 3 months ago. She's come back to the woods. Leonard's daughter. I see her every morning with the dogs. She doesn't know what she is, what her father was. But the dogs know. Animals always know. She's drawn to this place because it's in her blood. The genetic imprinting we did on Leonard is calling her home. I should warn her. I should tell her to run. But I'm old and I'm tired, and part of me wants to see if the experiment finally worked. If the next generation survived what the first could not. Raymond felt sick. He's been watching her. For months, he's been watching Allie walk these woods. There's more, Morrison said, her voice dropping. But I'm not the only one watching. Someone else knows she's here. Someone who wants to finish what Project Alpha started. Morrison looked up from the journal, her eyes meeting Raymond's. Her father wasn't missing, she whispered. He was erased. And now someone's trying to erase his daughter too. Above them, through the cabin floor, they heard shouting. Running footsteps. Raymond's radio crackled. Sheriff, we've got movement in the woods. The K-9 units picked up a fresh trail heading east. And Sheriff. The deputy's voice wavered. They found something else. Clothing. A child's jacket. Purple. It's still warm. Raymond and Morrison locked eyes for one terrible second. Then they were running. Night had fallen over Meadowfield by the time Raymond and Morrison reached the location where the jacket had been found. Portable floodlights had been set up, casting harsh white light across a small clearing about half a mile from Dr. Rain's cabin. The purple jacket lay crumpled on the ground, exactly as the deputies had found it. Raymond knelt beside it, touching the fabric carefully. Morrison was right. It was still warm. She was here, he said, his voice tight. Recently. Within the last hour. The K-9 units circled the area, their handlers struggling to keep them focused. The dogs kept pulling in different directions, whining and agitated, as if the scent trail scattered in multiple paths. It doesn't make sense, one handler said, frustration evident in his voice. It's like she was here, then just vanished. No clear trail leading away. Morrison scanned the tree line with her flashlight. Or she went underground again. Raymond's stomach dropped. The blueprints. Dr. Rain's journal mentioned sections of the facility we haven't found yet. If there are more entrances, Morrison started. Then she could be anywhere beneath our feet, Raymond finished grimly. He made the call. All teams were to return to the main bunker entrance. If there were hidden sections of the underground facility, They'd find them by working outward from what they knew. It was nearly 8 p.m. when Raymond descended the ladder back into the cold darkness of Project Alpha. This time they came prepared. Industrial lights. More personnel. Ground-penetrating radar equipment to map the facility's full extent. The forensic teams had been working all day, documenting everything. But now the focus shifted from evidence collection to active search and rescue. Somewhere in this maze of concrete and steel, an 8-year-old girl was hiding. Or being hidden. Shadow and Milo came down with Raymond, their earlier exhaustion forgotten. The moment their paws hit the concrete floor, both dogs' demeanor changed. Their ears flattened. Low growls rumbled in their chests. They sensed something the humans couldn't. "Easy, boys," Raymond murmured, but his hand instinctively moved to his weapon. The main corridors had been thoroughly searched during the day. Now the teams began working on the sealed doors and blocked passages. One by one, they forced their way into rooms that had been locked for decades. Storage chambers. Equipment rooms. Offices with desks still covered in decades-old paperwork. It was nearly midnight when one of the deputies called out from a corridor in the eastern section. "Sheriff, you need to hear this." Raymond jogged over, Morrison right behind him. The deputy stood in front of a solid concrete wall, his flashlight trained on the surface. At first, Raymond didn't understand what he was supposed to be noticing. Then he heard it. A faint scratching sound. Coming from behind the wall. "How thick is that concrete?" Morrison asked. The deputy knocked on it with the butt of his flashlight. The sound was hollow. "Maybe 6 inches. There's space behind it." Shadow and Milo suddenly bolted forward, nearly yanking their leashes from Raymond's hands. They slammed against the wall, barking furiously, claws scraping at the concrete with desperate intensity. "They smell something," Raymond said, his heart racing. "Get the breaching equipment. Now." It took 20 minutes to bring down the pneumatic hammer and set it up. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, the concrete cracking and crumbling under the assault. Dust filled the air, making everyone cough and cover their faces. When the hole was finally large enough, Raymond shined his flashlight through. A narrow crawlspace, barely 3 feet high, extended back into darkness. The smell that wafted out was overwhelming. Decay. Old death. But underneath that, something else. Something recent. "I'm going in," Raymond said, already pulling off his jacket. "The hell you are," Morrison countered. "Rodriguez, you're the smallest. You go first. Sheriff and I will be right behind you." Rodriguez nodded, his face pale but determined. He crawled through the opening, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls of the crawlspace. Raymond followed, the concrete scraping his shoulders as he squeezed through. Morrison came last, with Shadow and Milo squeezing in behind them, their large bodies barely fitting. The crawlspace opened into a small chamber that hadn't appeared on any of the blueprints. It was roughly 8 feet square, with a low ceiling that forced them to crouch. And it was filled with bones. Human bones. Animal bones. All mixed together in horrifying piles against the walls. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, his flashlight shaking in his hand. Morrison pulled out her radio. "We need forensic anthropology down here. Multiple human remains. Unknown number of victims." But Raymond wasn't looking at the bones. His attention was fixed on something else. In the center of the chamber, lying on the dirt floor as if carefully placed, was a small silver pendant on a chain. He moved closer, his hands trembling as he picked it up. The pendant was heart-shaped, with delicate engraving on the front. He turned it over, reading the inscription on the back by flashlight. "To Allie, love Mom." It was the necklace Janelle had given her daughter for her 7th birthday. The one Allie wore every single day. "She's been here," Raymond said, his voice barely a whisper. "In this room." Shadow and Milo had moved to the far corner of the chamber, away from the bones. They weren't barking anymore. Instead, they were whining, a high-pitched sound of distress. They circled a patch of dirt that looked different from the rest of the floor. Softer. Recently disturbed. Morrison saw it too. That earth's been moved. Recently. Raymond dropped to his knees beside the dogs, his hands already digging. The soil was loose, coming away easily. Rodriguez joined him, both men working frantically, scooping dirt aside with their bare hands. 1 foot down. 2 feet. The hole grew deeper. Then Raymond's fingers hit something solid. Not rock. Not concrete. Wood. There's something down here, he said, digging faster. Some kind of box or... A sound stopped him cold. Faint. Muffled. Coming from beneath the dirt. A voice. Please. Everyone froze. Did you hear that? Morrison whispered. The voice came again, weak and desperate, barely audible through the earth. Please. Don't let him find me. Raymond's heart nearly exploded out of his chest. Allie. Allie, can you hear me? No response. Get more hands in here, he shouted, his voice cracking. We need shovels now. There's someone alive down there. Officers poured into the chamber, bringing tools. They dug with controlled fury, careful not to go too deep too fast, terrified of hurting whoever was trapped below. The wooden surface was fully exposed now. A rectangular box, roughly the size of a coffin, buried 3 feet beneath the chamber floor. It had air holes drilled in the top. Oh God, Morrison breathed. Someone buried her alive. Raymond and Rodriguez worked at the edges, prying the box open. The wood was old but sturdy, nailed shut from the outside. It took precious minutes to get leverage, to start pulling the boards away. Finally, with a crack of splitting wood, the lid came free. Raymond tore it aside and aimed his flashlight down into the box. And there, curled in a ball, dirty and terrified but alive, was Allie Thompson. Her eyes squinted against the sudden light. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt. But when she saw Raymond's face, something like hope flickered in her expression. It's okay, Raymond said, his voice breaking as he reached down to lift her out. You're safe now. I've got you. Allie's small arms wrapped around his neck as he pulled her from the box. She was trembling violently, her body ice cold despite the jacket someone had left draped over her. She buried her face in his shoulder, and he felt her tears soaking through his shirt. Morrison was already calling for paramedics. Rodriguez draped his own jacket around the little girl, his hands shaking. You're safe, Raymond kept repeating, holding Allie tight. You're safe now. But even as he said the words, even as relief flooded through him, Allie pulled back slightly. Her eyes, wide and terrified, met his. He's still here, she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. He said he'd come back. He said. Her small body shook with sobs. He said I was special. Like Daddy. He said the experiments weren't finished. Raymond felt ice flood his veins. Who, Allie? Who said that? The little girl's eyes darted to the entrance of the chamber, to the dark crawlspace beyond. The man who smells like the woods, she whispered. He looks like pictures of Daddy, but different. Wrong. His eyes are wrong. Morrison's face went pale. Raymond, Dr. Raines is in custody. If someone else was involved. A sound echoed through the crawlspace. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming closer. Shadow and Milo erupted in furious barking, their bodies pressed against Raymond and Allie, protective and terrified all at once. Raymond handed Allie to Morrison. Get her out of here. Now. He drew his weapon, aiming at the dark entrance to the chamber. The footsteps stopped just outside the opening. Then a voice drifted in. Male. Calm. Almost gentle. You found her. Good. I was hoping you would. But you can't take her. Not yet. The final phase isn't complete. A figure appeared in the opening, backlit by the lights in the corridor beyond. Raymond couldn't make out the face. Step into the light, Raymond ordered, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Hands where I can see them. The figure laughed softly. You don't understand, Sheriff. You can't stop this. It's already in her blood. In her DNA. Just like it was in mine. The figure stepped forward into Raymond's flashlight beam. And Raymond's world tilted. The man had Leonard Thompson's face. The same kind eyes from the photograph. The same nervous smile. But something was terribly, horribly wrong. His eyes reflected the light like an animal's. Golden and inhuman. "Hello, Sheriff," the man said softly. "I'm here for my daughter." Raymond's finger tightened on the trigger, but he couldn't bring himself to fire. The man standing before him wore Leonard Thompson's face like a mask that didn't quite fit. Everything was wrong. The way he moved, too fluid, too predatory. The way he held his head, tilted slightly like an animal assessing prey. And those eyes. Those terrible golden eyes that caught the light and threw it back. "Don't move," Raymond ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "I don't care who you were. You stay right where you are." Behind him, Morrison was already moving, pulling Allie through a secondary exit the team had opened during their excavation. Rodriguez and 2 other officers positioned themselves between Raymond and the retreat route, weapons drawn. The man who might be Leonard Thompson smiled sadly. "You're afraid. I understand. I was afraid too when I realized what they'd done to me. What I'd become. Daddy." Allie's voice was small, broken, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Don't listen to him," Morrison said firmly, holding Allie tight. "Keep moving." But Allie twisted in Morrison's arms, staring at the figure in the crawlspace entrance. Tears streamed down her dirty face. "Daddy, is that really you?" The man's expression crumbled. For just a moment, Raymond saw something human there. Pain. Love. Regret. "Baby girl. I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to see me like this. I never wanted you to be part of any of this." "Then why?" Raymond demanded. "Why did you take her? Why bury her in that box?" "I didn't," Leonard said, his voice anguished. "I was trying to protect her. To hide her from him. From the one who wants to finish what Project Alpha started." His golden eyes fixed on Raymond. Dr. Raines was just the beginning. The guilty conscience. But there's another. Someone who still believes in the work. Someone who's been watching Allie since she was born, waiting for her to manifest the traits. "What traits?" Morrison asked, though Raymond suspected she already knew the answer. Leonard's jaw tightened. "The genetic modifications I received, they were passed to her. She has abilities I never fully developed. Enhanced senses. Instinctual connection to canines. Survival instincts that border on precognitive. She's what Project Alpha always wanted to create." His voice dropped. "And that makes her valuable. Dangerously valuable. So you buried your own daughter alive?" Raymond's disgust was evident. The box had air holes. Food. Water. "I was coming back for her as soon as I dealt with." Leonard stopped abruptly, his head snapping to the side, those inhuman eyes focusing on something in the darkness behind him. "He's here. He found us." Raymond heard it then. Movement in the corridor beyond. Not footsteps. Something else. Something that moved too quietly to be human. "Get her out," Leonard shouted, suddenly urgent. "Now. Get her out and don't stop running." Morrison didn't need to be told twice. She bolted with Allie, Rodriguez, and the other officers providing cover as they raced back through the crawlspace toward the main facility. Raymond kept his weapon trained on Leonard. "You're coming with us." "No, Sheriff. I'm staying. Someone has to." Leonard's form seemed to shift, his posture dropping, becoming something that wasn't quite human anymore. "Run. While you still can." A sound echoed through the corridor. A voice, distorted and mechanical, speaking through some kind of intercom system that shouldn't have power. "Subject A13. Your persistence is noted, but evolution cannot be stopped by sentiment." The lights in the crawlspace flickered. Then, impossibly, they came on. Harsh fluorescent bulbs that hadn't worked in decades suddenly blazing to life, flooding the chamber with cold white light. Raymond shielded his eyes, temporarily blinded. When his vision cleared, Leonard was gone, vanished into the newly illuminated corridors like a ghost. "Sheriff," a deputy's voice crackled over his radio. "The whole facility is powering up. Lights, computers, everything. How is that possible? Raymond ran. He squeezed back through the crawlspace, his heart hammering, and emerged into the main corridor to find it transformed. The abandoned facility from this morning was gone. Now the hallway was lit, active, humming with electrical life that had no source. And the screens. Every monitor, every computer terminal that had been dark and dead, was now glowing with an eerie blue light. Morrison had stopped 50 feet ahead, Allie still in her arms, staring at the nearest monitor in horror. Raymond reached them, following her gaze. The screen displayed a personnel file. Recent. Current. The photograph showed Allie, taken from one of her morning walks, Shadow and Milo visible beside her. The text below made Raymond's blood run cold. Subject A, 14. Thompson, Allie age, 8 status. Active genetic viability. 96.7% clearance for Phase 4 testing. Approved. Phase 4, Morrison whispered. There's a Phase 4. More screens flickered to life throughout the facility, each one displaying similar files. Other children. Other names. Some as recent as last month. All marked as active or in observation. Project Alpha hadn't ended 30 years ago. It had evolved. Allie buried her face in Morrison's shoulder, her small body shaking. He told me, she whispered. The man with the wrong eyes. He said I was special. That Daddy's gift was in my blood. That one day I'd understand. What man, sweetheart? Morrison asked gently, even as she kept moving toward the exit. Was it your father? No. Allie's voice was tiny, terrified. It was the other man. The one who smells like hospitals. He's been watching me for a long time. He said when I was ready, he'd show me what I really am. Raymond's radio erupted with overlapping voices. Officers throughout the facility reporting the same thing. Power restoration. Active computer systems. And something else. Movement in the sealed sections. Sounds of doors opening that had been locked for decades. All units, evacuate the facility, Raymond ordered. Everyone out now. They ran for the main ladder, Allie clinging to Morrison, Raymond covering their retreat. Behind them, the facility continued waking up, like some sleeping beast stirring after a long hibernation. They reached the ladder. Morrison handed Allie up to waiting officers at the surface, then climbed after her. Raymond was last, and as he grabbed the first rung, he looked back one final time. At the far end of the corridor, silhouetted against the glowing screens, stood a figure in a white lab coat. Too distant to make out features, but Raymond could feel those eyes on him. Assessing. Calculating. The figure raised one hand in what might have been a wave. Or a promise. Then every light in the facility cut out simultaneously, plunging everything back into darkness. Raymond scrambled up the ladder, his breath coming in gasps. When he emerged into the cool night air, surrounded by floodlights and officers and the controlled chaos of the crime scene, he felt like he'd just escaped from hell itself. Janelle was there, having been brought to the scene when word came that Allie had been found. She rushed forward, sobbing, and Morrison gently transferred the little girl into her mother's arms. Baby, oh my baby, Janelle cried, holding Allie so tight it looked like she'd never let go. You're safe. You're safe now. But Allie looked over her mother's shoulder at Raymond, and in her eyes, he saw something that made his stomach drop. Not relief. Not safety. Fear. He's not done, Allie whispered, loud enough for only Raymond to hear. He said this was just the beginning. He said there are others like me. That we're all part of something bigger. Raymond knelt beside her, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. We're going to protect you, Allie. I promise. Whatever this is, whoever is behind it, we're going to stop them. Allie's small hand gripped his. You can't stop evolution, Sheriff. That's what Dr. Raines said. That's what the man in the white coat keeps saying. You can't stop what's already in our blood. Morrison appeared at Raymond's side, her phone pressed to her ear. Her face had gone pale. Raymond, we've got a problem. I just got word from the hospital. Dr. Raines is awake. He's talking. And he says there's someone else. A colleague from Project Alpha who survived the shutdown. Someone with resources and connections who's been continuing the research privately. Who? Raymond demanded. Morrison's voice was grim. He won't say the name. He keeps saying we need to look at the new files. The ones that just appeared on the facility's computers. Raymond looked back at the bunker entrance, now crawling with federal agents who'd finally arrived on scene. The facility was being sealed, every computer and file being seized as evidence. But something told him they were too late. Whatever they'd found down there, whatever had just powered up and revealed itself, it was only the tip of something much larger, much darker. His radio crackled one last time. A voice he didn't recognize. Distorted. Electronic. Sheriff Cole. I hope you enjoyed your first glimpse of the future. Subject A. 14 is quite remarkable, isn't she? But she's just one of many. The next generation of humanity is already walking among you. And there's nothing you can do to stop what's coming. The transmission cut off. Raymond looked at Allie, still clutched in her mother's arms, and saw those same eyes that had haunted him in the underground corridor. Not quite golden like her father's, but not entirely human either. And in that moment, he realized the horrifying truth. They hadn't saved Allie from Project Alpha. They'd just revealed her to it. By dawn, Meadowfield had been transformed into a federal operation zone. Black SUVs lined every road leading to the bunker site. Men and women in dark suits with serious faces and concealed weapons moved with quiet efficiency, seizing every piece of evidence Raymond's team had collected. Raymond stood beside his cruiser, watching his investigation being dismantled before his eyes. A man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and cold eyes approached, flashing credentials that identified him as Special Agent Warren Fletcher, Homeland Security. Sheriff Cole, I'll need you and your team to turn over all files, photographs, and recordings related to this incident. This is my case, Raymond said, his jaw tight. A child was kidnapped and nearly killed. Multiple human remains were found. This is a criminal investigation. Fletcher's expression didn't change. This is now a matter of national security. Project Alpha was a classified government research program. Everything related to it falls under federal jurisdiction. Your cooperation isn't optional. National security? Raymond's voice rose. You're covering up human experimentation on children. Lower your voice, Sheriff, Fletcher said quietly, but there was steel beneath the words. What happened here 30 years ago was unfortunate, but dragging it into the public eye now would serve no purpose except to create panic and damage national security interests. The program was shut down. The responsible parties are either dead or, like Dr. Raines, in custody. Someone powered up that facility last night, Raymond countered. Someone is continuing the research. There are active files on children, current photographs. Which we are investigating, Fletcher interrupted. Through proper channels. With appropriate clearance levels. This is beyond your scope, Sheriff. Be grateful you found the child alive. Take your win and let us handle the rest. Morrison appeared at Raymond's side, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. So that's it. We just pretend none of this happened. Fletcher turned his cold gaze on her. A missing child was recovered. That's what happened. That's what will be reported. The details of where she was found and what you discovered are classified. You'll both sign non-disclosure agreements before you leave the site. Any violation will result in federal prosecution. He paused. Are we clear? Raymond wanted to punch the smug expression off the man's face. But he'd been in law enforcement long enough to know when he was outmatched. The federal government had rolled in with all its weight, and there was nothing he could do about it. Crystal, Raymond said through gritted teeth. By noon, the media had arrived in force. News vans clogged Main Street. Reporters thrust microphones at anyone who'd talk. But the official story was already being controlled. Federal press liaisons gave carefully worded statements about a missing child successfully recovered by local law enforcement with federal assistance. No mention of underground facilities. No mention of Project Alpha. No mention of genetic experiments or the bodies found in the crawlspace. Just a happy ending. A little girl safely returned to her mother. Raymond stood in the police station, watching the sanitized version of events play out on every news channel, and felt sick. Morrison touched his shoulder. "We can't let them bury this. What choice do we have?" Raymond gestured at the NDAs on his desk, waiting for their signatures. "They've got us boxed in. We talk, we go to prison. Then we find someone who can talk. Someone who isn't bound by those agreements." Raymond looked at her. "Who?" Morrison's eyes gleamed with determination. "Someone who already knows pieces of this story. Someone who's been asking questions." Keisha Williams had been a journalist for 15 years. The last 3 spent working for a local news station in Meadowfield after burning out covering wars overseas. She'd come here for peace and quiet. Small-town stories. School board meetings and county fairs. Instead, she'd stumbled onto the story of her career. For weeks, she'd been hearing whispers. Strange things happening in the woods. A missing child. Federal agents swarming the area. Official stories that didn't match what witnesses reported. She'd tried to get information from Sheriff Cole, but he'd shut her down. Professional but firm. Whatever had happened out there, someone didn't want her digging. Which, of course, only made her dig harder. She was in her apartment late that night, reviewing footage her cameraman had shot near the bunker site before federal agents ran them off, when she heard scratching at her door. Keisha froze. She lived alone on the 3rd floor. Nothing should be scratching at her door. The sound came again. Insistent. Accompanied by soft whining. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept by the door and looked through the peephole. 2 dogs. Large German shepherds. Sitting patiently in the hallway. Keisha recognized them immediately. She'd seen them in footage of the rescue. The Thompson girls' dogs. Shadow and Milo. Slowly, she opened the door. "What are you 2 doing here?" Shadow stood immediately, something clenched gently in his jaws. He moved forward and dropped it at her feet. A flash drive. Muddy and worn but intact. Keisha picked it up, her heart racing. "Where did you get this?" Milo turned and started walking down the hallway toward the stairs. Shadow waited, watching her expectantly. "You want me to follow you," Keisha breathed. "Don't you?" Shadow's tail wagged once. Against every instinct of common sense, Keisha grabbed her bag, her camera, and followed the dogs into the night. They led her to the woods, moving with purpose through trails she'd never seen before. Keisha recorded everything on her phone, following the dogs deeper into the forest. After 30 minutes, they stopped at the ruins of an old cabin, mostly collapsed and overgrown. Shadow began digging at a spot near the foundation. Milo joined him, both dogs working with focused intensity. Keisha used her flashlight to illuminate what they were uncovering. A metal box, buried shallow, designed to be found by someone who knew where to look. Inside were documents, flash drives, hard drives in protective cases, and a handwritten note on yellowed paper. "If you're reading this, I'm either dead or unable to speak. My name is Dr. Leonard Rains. What follows is the complete truth about Project Alpha. Names, dates, proof. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. Let the world know what we did, what they're still doing." Keisha's hands shook as she loaded the first flash drive into her laptop. The files opened, revealing decades of documentation. Research notes, photographs, video footage of experiments conducted on children, financial records showing continued funding under different program names, different agencies, but the same underlying purpose. And names, current names, people still active in government and military positions. This wasn't just history. This was an ongoing conspiracy. "Oh my God," Keisha whispered. Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent. Keisha looked up to see headlights in the distance, moving toward the cabin. Multiple vehicles. "They know I'm here," she breathed, shoving everything back into her bag. "They're coming." She ran. The dogs led her through the forest by routes that avoided the approaching vehicles. She made it to her car, heart hammering, and drove straight to the television station. At 3 a.m., Keisha sat in the editing bay, preparing the most important broadcast of her life. Her news director, roused from bed by her frantic call, watched over her shoulder in stunned silence. "If we air this, they'll come for us," he said quietly. "If we don't air this, we're complicit," Keisha countered. "This is why we became journalists. To expose the truth, no matter the cost." At 6 a.m., just as the morning news was set to begin, Keisha went live. She stood in front of the camera, the documents and footage queued up behind her, and began telling the story federal agents had tried to bury. "Good morning. My name is Keisha Williams, and what I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you think you know about your government's commitment to protecting its children." She showed the documents, the photographs, carefully edited footage that proved genetic experimentation had been conducted on American citizens, many of them children, for decades. She named names, showed the financial trails, connected Project Alpha to current government programs still operating under different classifications. The story went live on air and simultaneously uploaded to every platform she could access. By the time federal agents burst into the station 8 minutes later, the information was already spreading across the internet like wildfire. Keisha was in the middle of revealing the current locations of suspected research sites when the broadcast suddenly cut. Her microphone went dead. The screens went black. She looked up to see Agent Fletcher striding onto the set, 24 armed agents behind him. "Keisha Williams, you're under arrest for the unauthorized disclosure of classified information and violations of the National Security Act." But Keisha smiled as they cuffed her, because across the world people were watching, recording, sharing. The truth was out, and in a quiet farmhouse on the edge of Meadowfield, Allie Thompson sat with her mother, watching the broadcast on their laptop before it cut out. Tears streamed down the little girl's face. "They know now," she whispered. "Everyone knows." Janelle held her daughter close. "Does that make you feel safer?" Allie was quiet for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No, Mama. It makes me feel more scared. Because now they'll have to do something about all of us. All the kids like me." Outside, Shadow and Milo stood at the tree line, watching the house. Protecting. Waiting. Because the truth was out. But the war was just beginning. 3 weeks after Keisha Williams' broadcast, the world was still reeling. Congressional hearings had been called. Whistleblowers emerged from shadows they'd hidden in for decades. Federal agencies scrambled to control the narrative, but the damage was done. Project Alpha was no longer a buried secret. It was front-page news, trending hashtags, and late-night monologue material. But for Allie Thompson, life had become something else entirely. She sat on the front porch of her family's farmhouse, the same spot where her mother used to wave goodbye each morning as Allie disappeared into the woods. Now, the woods remained untouched by her small feet. She hadn't gone back. Not once. Shadow lay on one side of her, his massive head resting on her lap. Milo stretched out on the other, his eyes half closed in the afternoon sun. But even in rest, both dogs remained alert. Their ears twitched at every sound. Their muscles tensed at any movement near the tree line. They were always watching, always waiting. Janelle pushed open the screen door, carrying 2 glasses of sweet tea. She settled into the rocking chair beside Allie, handing her daughter one of the glasses. For a moment, they just sat in comfortable silence, the way they used to before everything changed. "Reporter called again this morning," Janelle said quietly. "From that big network in New York. They want to do a special feature. Call it The Girl Who Found the Truth." Allie didn't respond. She just stroked Shadow's fur, her fingers working through the thick coat in familiar patterns. "I told them no," Janelle continued. "Like I've told all the others. You're not a story. You're my daughter. And you deserve to be a child, not a headline." "They're going to keep calling," Allie said softly. "Aren't they?" "Probably." Janelle sipped her tea. "But they'll get tired eventually. Find some other story to chase. And then maybe we can have our lives back." Allie looked at her mother, and Janelle saw something in those eyes that broke her heart. A wisdom no 8-year-old should possess. A weight no child should have to carry. "Mama, We're not getting our lives back. Not really. Janelle set down her tea and pulled Allie close. Baby, I know what you went through was. It's not about what happened, Allie interrupted gently. It's about what I am. What Daddy made me. What's in my blood. The DNA tests had been run a dozen times by different agencies, all reaching the same impossible conclusion. Allie Thompson's genetic code had been altered in ways science couldn't fully explain. Canine DNA woven into her human genome. Enhanced senses. Instincts that defied normal human parameters. She was a living testament to Project Alpha's twisted success. And she wasn't alone. In the weeks since Keisha's broadcast, 43 other children across the country had been identified with similar genetic markers. Children of former Project Alpha subjects. Second-generation experiments who'd been living normal lives, unaware of what lurked in their DNA. Until now. You're still my baby girl, Janelle said fiercely. No matter what those tests say. No matter what they did to your father or what's in your blood. You're still mine. Allie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I know, Mama. But I'm something else too. And I can feel it sometimes. Especially at night. Janelle stiffened. Feel what? The call, Allie whispered. Like something deep in the woods is calling my name. Shadow and Milo hear it too. That's why they pace near the tree line. That's why they bark at nothing. As if on cue, both dogs' heads snapped up, their attention fixed on the forest beyond the yard. A low growl rumbled in Shadow's chest. There's nothing out there, baby, Janelle said, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, there is, Allie said. But I don't think it's trying to hurt me anymore. I think it's just watching. Waiting to see what I become. Raymond Cole's cruiser pulled up the gravel driveway, dust trailing behind it. He'd been stopping by every few days, checking on them. The federal investigation had mostly frozen him out, but he refused to completely let go of the case. Or the people at its center. He climbed out, adjusting his hat, and walked over to the porch. Afternoon, ladies. Sheriff. Janelle greeted him with a tired smile. Sweet tea. Appreciate it, but I can't stay long. Raymond's eyes were serious as they settled on Allie. I wanted to let you know. Dr. Raines passed away last night. Heart attack in his cell. Janelle's hand went to her mouth. Oh my God. But Allie just nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting it. Did he say anything? Before he died. Raymond hesitated, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. The guards found this on his bed this morning. It's addressed to you. He handed it to Allie. The paper trembled slightly in her small hands as she unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, but the words were clear enough. Dear Allie, I'm sorry for what we did to your father. I'm sorry for what that made you. But I'm not sorry you exist. You and the others like you, you're not abominations. You're survivors. You're the future, whether the world is ready for it or not. They'll try to control you, study you, use you. Don't let them. You're more than an experiment. You're more than your DNA. Your father loved you. That's why he tried to hide you. That's why he became something less than human, to protect something more than human. You. Be careful. Be strong. And remember, the woods will always call to you. But you get to decide if you answer. Dr. L. Raines. Allie read it twice, then carefully folded the paper and tucked it in her pocket. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she made no sound. Raymond knelt beside the porch steps. You okay, kiddo? He said I was the last one, Allie whispered, looking toward the woods. That day in the underground room. He said I was the last one. But I don't think that's true. I think I'm just the first. The first one people know about. What do you mean? Janelle asked, fear creeping into her voice. Allie turned to look at her mother, and for just a moment in the late afternoon light, her eyes caught the sun in a way that made them appear almost golden. There are others, Mama. I can feel them. Scattered all over. And they can feel me too. We're connected somehow. By what was done to our parents. by what's in our blood. She paused. And something's waking us up. Raymond exchanged a worried glance with Janelle. Allie, if you know something, if you're in danger. I'm not in danger, Sheriff. Not anymore. Allie stood, Shadow and Milo immediately flanking her sides. Whatever was hunting me, whatever wanted to finish the experiments, it's waiting now. Watching. Because everything changed when the truth came out. The world knows about us now. About what we are. And that changes everything. She walked to the edge of the porch, staring out at the forest that had been her playground and her prison. The place where she'd almost lost everything. The place that still called to her in her dreams. Do you ever wish none of this had happened? Janelle asked softly. That Keisha had never found those files? That the truth had stayed buried? Allie was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then she shook her head. No, Mama. Secrets are like poison. They eat you from the inside. The truth hurts, but at least it's real. At least we know what we're fighting now. She turned to face her mother and Raymond, and despite everything she'd been through, despite the weight she carried, she smiled. A real smile. 8 years old and impossibly brave. Besides, I'm not afraid anymore. I have Shadow and Milo. I have you. And somewhere out there, I have a father who turned himself into a monster to protect me. That's something, isn't it? Janelle pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. That's everything, baby. That's everything. As the sun began to set over Meadowfield, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Raymond climbed back into his cruiser. Before he left, he looked back at the farmhouse one last time. Allie stood on the porch between her mother and her dogs, silhouetted against the dying light. And for just a moment, Raymond could swear he saw other figures in the forest behind them. Shapes that might have been human, or might have been something else. They were watching, waiting. The war Keisha had started with her broadcast wasn't over. It was just beginning. But looking at that little girl standing strong with her family, Raymond felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. That night, after Allie had been tucked into bed and Janelle had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, Shadow and Milo rose from their positions by Allie's bedroom door. They padded down the stairs, through the kitchen, and out the dog door into the cool night air. They stood at the tree line, ears pricked forward, listening. And deep in the forest, something listened back. In the underground facility, sealed and supposedly deactivated, a single computer screen flickered to life in the darkness. Green text scrolled across the black background. Subject A14. Monitoring active. Genetic development. Within parameters. Next phase. Pending authorization. Status. Evolution continuing. The screen went dark again. But somewhere beneath the earth, deeper than any officer had searched, deeper than any federal agent had found, machinery hummed softly to life. A pump began circulating fluid through ancient tubes. A generator kicked on, feeding power to systems that had been waiting for decades. And in a chamber no one had discovered yet, preserved in ways science couldn't explain, something opened its eyes. The wind howled through Meadowfield, bending the trees and rattling windows. And if you listened very carefully, beneath the wind, beneath the rustling leaves, you could hear it. A faint mechanical hum. The sound of something waking up. The sound of evolution refusing to sleep. So tell me, do you think some secrets are better left buried, or should the truth always come out, no matter the cost? What would you have done in Sheriff Cole's position? In Keisha's? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next. Click on the image or video showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.